My name is Wanda Bamet. I was born on February 20th, 1934, in Ukraine. At that time, Ukraine was under Soviet rule, Soviet meaning Russia. I lived in Ukraine till the time the Germans took us to Germany. Those were happy years in the beginning, and later on they were not so happy. So I was born in a very large city, a very industrial city. The name of the city is Dnipropetrovsk. Now, Dnipropetrovsk, the name is actually there are two portions. There is Dnipro, meaning the river Dnipro, and Petrovsk was a big communist. So he was honored by having his name attached to a big city. So Dnipropetrovsk. Petrovsk was his name. Now, before that, so this is 1920s, that Dnipropetrovsk, or before that it was called Yekaterinoslav. This is in the name of the Russian queen, Catherine, or Yekaterina, so Yekaterinoslav. And of course, before that, it was called Syczeslav. This is way back to the Cossack times that city was there. Now, as I mentioned, that Dnipropetrovsk was a very industrial city. It had several metallurgical plants. They produced a lot of metal for Ukraine, for the whole Soviet Union, and even for exports. Now, my father was one of the engineers of the metallurgical plants there. So my family, originally, my father's grandfather, he bought land when Ukraine was still had serfdom. During Tsarist time, Ukraine had serfdom. All right, so they were on their own land, but the land didn't belong to them. They only worked for whoever was in charge there. But when the serfdom ended, my great-grandfather then had land, and he said, well, I don't need the land. I have many children, but he sold the land, and he moved to Katerinoslav at that time, to Dnipropetrovsk. Well, my father built a very large house, actually on the land that was originally their family land. But it was confiscated by the Soviet Union. So he got a plot for his land, on his land, and he built a 9-room house. 2 rooms, his mother was living, my grandmother, and the rest of the rooms, he had a big room for his office, his drafting room, and then the rest was bedrooms and kitchen and dining room and all other things for the family room. So for that time, it was a very large house. So 2 rooms were separated for my grandmother, my father's mother. And then the rest of the rooms, we occupied my father, my mother, my sister, and I. That is during pre-war time. During wartime, there were also my aunt and her children were there for a short time. And during the war, Germans occupied my father's drafting room. Well, when the German occupation was, I was aware of that. We were just pushed in our house because the German soldiers started to occupy my father's drafting room. We were pushed to our smaller quarters, and it was a very uncertain time. Well, there were just soldiers that came in, and they said that we need your drafting room, and they had a special entrance to that from the big from the inside room. They entered, and our quarters were separated completely, so we had to move. And then later on, my aunt was with us, with her 2 children, and she told us that the grandma was killed by shrapnel and she is buried right under the tree. A board was put up over her, and ground was filled up on top of it, and she is just there, so that we have to send some man. Maybe my father would find some man to go and bury her. So she was then, that is already when the German occupation was, maybe a couple months later that was done. Now, Germany occupied Ukraine. It was, 1943. We were not in our house at that time. My family went to my mother's aunt. My mother and my aunt were cooking supper. And I was on a mulberry tree picking mulberries, not aware of anything, what's going on. And all of a sudden, because it was evening, and they were cooking supper, so there was flame, the German planes came over us and started shooting from, I don't know, from some kind of so I was on the mulberry tree. I had to climb off the mulberry tree. My parents had to run, so we ran to our bomb shelter. The bomb shelter was actually a hole in the ground, covered by a board, and then covered with a little bit of dirt on top. So we ran. Well, I didn't make on time. There was a bomb that exploded also in the yard, and I got deaf from that. We stayed at my mother's, and then after this, there were Germans walking through her yard, soldiers. So we knew that this was the German occupation, and they were walking with the guns pointing, We stayed at my mother's sister for a while, and then we returned home. When we returned home, it was very strange feeling, because there were people laying on the road that were killed. And we tried to walk very, quietly, not to. It was not very far to walk, but we came to our house, and there were other people that were hiding in our house besides my grandmother and my mother's aunt. And we decided, because our house was very close to the river Dnipro, just a couple homes before the river. And we thought, well, there would be more soldiers maybe coming through this area. So we went to my father's aunt. We stayed there until fall. There were no food. Their stores were closed or pilfered or robbed. There was nothing to eat. My mother, during the time that war was coming, she dried slices of bread. And then what we did, mother would soak that bread in with water, rehydrate it, and this would be our food. Now, when we were staying with my aunt, my mother and my sister went to a field that was not far away that had cabbage growing. And there were no more cabbage heads. Somebody already took them, cut them off. But there were lower leaves left. So my mother ordered my sister to pick those leaves, cut them, and put them in a big sack. So we had cabbage leaves. Now, as you know, the outside cabbage leaves are not very tasty. They are bitter. So my mother figured out if she would cook the cabbage leaves with one water and then throw that water and then cook it second time, all this bitterness, most of it is gone. So we were eating cabbage leaves that were cooked like that with the dry bread that was rehydrated. That was our meals. That's not much, But we survived. Later on, there was also rations of bread during German occupations in our passport, in my father's and my mother's. They stamped every month we would get so much bread. But that bread is baked with addition of pea flour. First of all, it didn't taste right. It didn't taste good. And what more, that it would get moldy very quickly. So it didn't last a month. There was no refrigeration, special things for this bread. So it would get moldy, and you cannot eat it. So you can eat maybe first couple days, first couple of weeks, and then it was moldy. You cannot eat that. So that was very difficult times. And then when we finally returned to our house, to our home, as I said, the Germans occupied my father's drafting room. And so there were tensions because we had them in our house, and my grandmother had 2 rooms, and then my aunt came later on. And so there were too many people on the floor sleeping. During the day it was fine. During the evening it is problem where we would sleep. Of course, we had fruit trees then, so there was some kind of a nourishment from the fruit. Now, as I said, that every month there would be bread issued, and in the passport it was stamped for that month we received. So there was no other nourishment available. It was very difficult times. Even living back in our own home, there was not much to eat. How we wound up in Germany. My mother and father realized there was possibly war coming to some kind of maybe Germans are retreating. At that time, we could not listen to radio or any news. Okay, so it was only what people are talking. There was actually during German occupation, if you had a radio, you would go to prison, or you could get shot for that. So you could not listen to what's happening in the war or news. You had no news. My parents and my sister and I, we went across the river to a bigger market to sell my father's winter coat, fur coat, and some carpets. We wanted to sell this or exchange for food. And the kids were taken to my father's relatives, and my mother and my father went to the market with these goods. And at the market, they were told that the left side of the river was told that they have 20 minutes to evacuate to the right side. If they don't evacuate, they would be killed. So there was my grandmother and my mother's aunt, a very old lady. She was about 85 at the time, and my grandmother. So we didn't know what happened. So then we could not return home. So we stayed on the right side of the river. My mother, she said, well, I'm going to go rush over there and pick up my sewing machine. And Dad said, well, do we really need it? Oh, yes, without sewing machine, so her sewing machine was more important than, and my dad was supposed to go and pick us, my sister and me, from the relatives, and they would meet back on the right side of the river. Well, my mother took off, and my dad came and picked us up, and we came and were waiting for my mother to join us. Well, the soldiers said, there is a train, get into the train. And my father said, well, I'm waiting. No, all of us had to go and get into the train. This was not train not for people. This is train that was carrying cattle or carrying heavy equipment. It just had one big door and a couple little slits for windows. So we had to go there. So we had my father's fur coat and a couple decorative things, carpets for the wall. That's all what we had with us. We didn't have any other clothing or anything more. And my mother took off. So we had to get on the train. And during the evening, the train crossed the river to the left, to the left side of the town, pick up more people, and that by evening took off to Germany. We didn't know where our mother was. We just had to follow what the orders were, but the orders were under a gun. You cannot choose what you want to do, okay? So after that, and the train would stop for us to go to the bathroom at the stops that there was very thinly populated. And then a couple of days later, we found out that mother was couple wagons down. She was actually in the same train. So we were then together. We were brought to Germany in about 10 days. We were not fed during the time. Only the time that you stopped to relieve yourself, only there we could either beg for food or what. So we were brought to Germany. It was camp number 37, Ostarbeiters Camp number 37, 37. That's all what I hear, 37, meaning 37. As you know, the Germans, they say first sieben and then 30, the other way. Yeah. All right, we were placed in a room that had 2 families already. The room was divided into 4 quarters. 3 quarters were occupied by family, and 1 quarter where we have entrance to the room, bathroom, cold water running, and also table and bench. Now, we got two double bunk beds. So that they were metal bunk beds. Now, my sister and I, we were on top, and my parents were on the bottom. Now, the mattress was made out of straw mattresses. We were given a sheet and a blanket and a straw mattress and a straw pillow too. Well, if you look at the fibers of the mattress, you could see straw because the mattress, the fabric was made out of paper too. So it's not really any kind of a fabric, but and it held straws in there. Yeah. Now, during the day in Germany, of course, we were bombed because our camp was built within walking distance, or actually maybe a little bit further than that door. There was factory. So all these camps were built next to the factories. So they would not have to bus us to work in their factories or anything. You just walk there. So when the factory is bombed, well, we had to do something in the camp. Now, our parents were working, so there were still some kids and few elderly people that stayed in the camp. We were allowed then to go to a shelter that is in the village. So when we have the alarm saying that the planes are coming to bomb the factories, we had to run into the village. There was a very large bomb shelter built out of concrete, 5-story high, and our place for the campers, we stayed on the top floor. The Germans only occupied the lower floor. So if the bomb comes, it usually gets the top gets it. Now we had the English would come and bomb, and then the Americans. There were 2 bombings a day. So sometimes we just said, okay, what's the use running to the shelter? For a long time, this is bombing. This is not fun. It's your life, and under such conditions, you go to the bomb shelter. Now, luckily, these factories were not very important factories, so sometimes they were bombed. Their bombs were there because later on, when we, at the end of the war, we went into those factories and we took their books and the pages that were not used. We actually tore them out, and we made our notebooks out of that. And we took the pencils and everything out of the offices, It was the kids' stuff already. Life in the camp, so between the bombings, around 12 o'clock, 12 to 1 o'clock, everybody in the camp received food. And so everyone got a ticket for a day. And so they could get a meal per day. And what was the meal? Meal consisted of a bowl of soup and a slice of bread about this big, bread like this, and 7 grams of margarine, and that was and a cup of coffee that was made from not from coffee beans, but some grains that were roasted and then milled. Okay, so children didn't get any milk or anything, and so each person in the camp received one meal like that, bread, 7 grams of margarine, and on Thursday we had potatoes. Now, as time went on, with this kind of food, you cannot really survive for long. I got very thin, and I had big boils that developed on my legs and on my arms. And it was difficult because the bandages were out of paper bandages, and you cannot attach those bandages to anything, just maybe slide underneath. Running to the bomb shelter was beginning a problem, and then coming back to the camp. So sometimes we stayed in the village and then ran to the nearby forest and waited till the next bombing. So from 1 o'clock till 6 o'clock, we were in the forest. We would pick up nuts in there. We would pick up mushrooms, berries there were. So, and sometimes we brought the wood for the, in this room we had a furnace that in the winter time we were given a little bit of wood and a couple pieces of coal briquettes that we could put in start the fire in the room so it would be warmer. Otherwise it was very, very cold. That part of Germany was not very, there was not much of a winter. We didn't get much snow or anything, so it was okay. Now, as I was telling, so the kids would wait over till, 3 or 5 of us would just stay there and then go to the second bombing into the bomb shelter and return to the camp. We had a ballerina from one of the cities, big cities in Ukraine, and she had a nanny because they had a child, and at that time they had a nanny, so she was with them. So husband was working, and the ballerina said that she could have maybe teach the girls a little bit of how to write, especially the German alphabet we had to learn. And we have to learn how to say Heil Hitler. And we didn't say Heil Hitler, we said something else. Heil Hitler, there was this greetings in Germany. That means Hitler, you know that.
What did you say instead?
Hitler is dead. Dead Hitler. Well, that was never told to the camp. I'm sure the teacher has heard that. So this woman, as I said, was ballerina. So she said, all right, I could work between the bombings, 1 o'clock and 6 o'clock bombings. We could have a class for a couple of hours a day. So she was teaching us the first steps and so on, and we did produce a Swan Lake. Now, being taken to Germany like that, you didn't have much clothing. Never mind have a theatrical dressing. But there was another woman in our camp who was actually designer of in one of the most probably movie houses and so on. So she collected old clothes and old things, made strings out of it. I have a picture actually of that, and the skirts and so on. So it looked like dressing for, and so we produced. One time we produced a Swan Lake, the girls. we had classes between first bombing and second. There would be like maybe 3-4 hours time. And that was very good because we learned, as I said, we didn't have books at that time. We didn't have anything. The German camp leaders, they gave us some paper to write, and so and pencils to write. So I learned the alphabet. I learned the Latin alphabet too, the German alphabet. And we were supposed to write German sentences, and so there was a little bit of schooling, a little bit, and the most thing keeping kids away from doing some other stuff. Kids always find things to occupy themselves, and so that was, as I look back, that was very good for the. Now, this camp, as I mentioned, is Ostarbeiters camp. Ost means east. This means from Germany, east meant Ukraine, not Polish part, but the Ukraine part of Soviet Union. And Eastarbeiter, that means Arbeiter is worker in German, and East, that means those workers that came from East. So the whole camp was of people that were brought from Ukraine. Now, as adults had Ost, just like Jewish people had the Jewish sign, and the Ukrainians had, they could not walk and mingle in the cities or so freely. This is what you had to wear, a sign that you are who you are. All of a sudden, there was no bombing. And what does that mean? Well, no bombing, quiet. And then, the guards, the camp guards, all disappeared. So to us, that was a sort of a signal that maybe the war ended. So one day of that, and the next day again, really quiet. And so we knew that it was probably, that is in May, early part of May 1945. Yeah. So we, in the camp, we knew, the adults knew about that, and they were starting to say that they are not going to return. And when the English soldiers or occupying people, I don't know how to call them, they came in and they said, well, you will be repatriated. Well, then I know adults did not want to repatriate. If I look at this as adult now, my father would be most probably either shot on the spot or sent to gulag camps. My mother was very ill at that time, and the kids would go to some kind of reform school. So there is no reason to return. Now, why I say my father would be killed? My father, by training and education, was a civil engineer. Okay, why didn't you immigrate? Why didn't you go with the Soviets? And why did you work for Germany? So he would be either executed or sent to Gulag. This is the Soviet camps that are in Siberia. My mother most probably would die, and we kids, we would go to some kind of reform school. That's what would be for us. And the country after the war would be also pilfered, and there would be no home. It wouldn't be returning back to the life that we had before. Now, so in the camp, but there were other people from other camps. They would come to the camp and say, "Oh, you don't want to return home? What kind of a person are you?" And they would, with knives, would go after adults, and all kinds of things were going on. Not good. So parents asked the occupying English, whoever were in charge, give us a camp, give us a place that we will not be bothered like that we would not, and we don't want to return, and so on. And they said, well, find the camp. Well, so my parents went around, and they found another camp, Camp 25. That was in another village. So when the news spread out that there is a camp for people that choose not to return, well, the camp got really bigger and bigger, and so Camp 25A filled up, and then nearby there was Camp 25B, and that was filled up, and there was a building in the forest that was also filled out. So we had a lot of people that came in. Now, how do you feed all these people and so on? So there were organizations like ERO and other that donated food. And so there we were getting once a day again feeding in the camp. And my parents and so older, they said, well, could we get our food we'll cook it ourselves. Give our rations, what is for the family, and we will cook that ourselves at home. Well, yeah, imagine all these people in the camps, and food is there, yes, and this is May, so you could run again to the forest and pick berries and so on. But that's not quite enough, not quite enough. So parents decided we have to organize school for the kids, and there were a lot of little kids. There were boys that were very mischievous, and so there was from 5 to 14, they organized the schooling. And from May to September, those two teachers were trying to organize kids, and so that they would behave the right way and so on. So in the camp, there was completely different feeling. Parents in this 25A camp organized people so that they repaired all the barracks that were. This was another camp that near another factories. Okay, they built all these camps for the people that came from east. All those workers. Now they are wooden. Some of them are damaged. So my father and all his adult friends, they repaired the building for and there were a lot more 14 and up kids in their camp that were working in the factories too. Organized rooms for school. There were 8 grades of school, 8 gymnasium, and 4 grammar school. So originally from May to September, there were 2 teachers that organized little kids and wanted to find out what they know, what grade would they go. So I was able to go to first grade gymnasium. Well, so that's 8, as I said, 8 grades gymnasium and 4 grades grammar school. That's pretty much the same kind of age that we have here in the United States. So they had to prepare barracks because some of them were damaged during the war. They have to prepare teachers. They had to prepare how to heat during the winter. All of that had to be done. So after this was done, well, my father and his friends, building engineers and so on, from scrap of broken barracks, they built a church. And I have some pictures of that. They built an Eastern Orthodox church. It has to face east. You know, that's the altar is always on the east side of the church. Okay, so we were getting help. We were getting rations and so on. And it's May month, so the rest of the people start digging all the little pieces of land in front of the barracks and back of the barracks. We planted tomatoes, we planted cucumbers, we planted all kinds of things. So this was, food for the future. Now, my father, he planted, of course, they were all smokers, there were no cigarettes or nothing. So my father, we had an outhouse and the next barracks, and nobody wanted to plant any food in their, outhouse. And he said, I'm gonna plant tobacco seeds. So he planted tobacco seeds. Would you believe those tobacco seeds grew into tobacco, really big plants? The tobacco leaves were so big, and he knew how to handle that. What he used to do, he would cut the lower leaves, and then specially drying procedure, and then especially cutting the tobacco leaf, then and cutting it into the tobacco. So that was, for them, that was a great thing for all of And we the kids, we start running around the camp looking for anything. And we found a big container, metal container. It had a faucet on the bottom and an opening on the top. And so we brought it to my mother to see it. I said, I have some rye grains. So she broke those grains and put it in a bucket. And then she poured hot water into that, so that those seeds kind of even puffed up. She had some brown sugar and some yeast and filled up with water then, this thing bucket. And in 2 weeks, or in 7 days, it fermented. Why I know that, my sister's birthday is in May 23rd, and by that time, this thing fermented. And so I poured a little bit from the faucet, a little bit to taste it. It's sweet and tasty, not realizing it has alcohol in there. So we kids, we were all hungry, so I poured everybody a glass of this fermented stuff. We drank it, we sang it, we all fell asleep on the ground. We were done. That was really funny because our parents found us on the floor asleep. The camp organized for people that are not returning to Soviet Union. Whoever was the English that were in charge of the camp came in and said that, there would be a situation that there would come trucks and they need miners in Belgium. So whoever would like to go there could go on those trucks tomorrow, and there would be a transfer to Belgium. Okay, so for parents, it was better to go there than to be going back home. So everybody was trying to, on the main route in the camp, everybody with whatever their belongings tried to come and get on the truck. Now, my father was was kind of not quite believing all that. Something is wrong. So he took my sister, and they approached one of the truck drivers. They thought, well, there was a black man driving. So they thought, well, he's an American, not English, so maybe he doesn't know exactly, the situation, what is that all for. So they approached him and they tried to ask him. My father didn't know English, my sister didn't know English, so they tried to ask in German the route. And they tried to say it in German, in French, and he shook his hand. So my father started naming big cities in Belgium. And he said, Leipzig. Well, Leipzig is the city in the Russian sector. Okay? So my father said, okay, and then he started walking and telling his friends that this is going to Leipzig. Well, whoever was in charge of this whole thing told the drivers, why did they pick this driver? He was a black man. They thought that the black driver is an American, not English. So he would tell, that it is going, that's why he said Leipzig. So they started the trucks and took out of the camp whoever was on the truck. They took all those people out. They took 400 people out of the camp. So the next day, when the people that were in charge came in and said, well, why didn't you go on the truck? What happened? And said, but you told us that this camp is not returning to Soviet Union, and yet they were taken to Leipzig. This is treason. You tricked us. Well, by agreement in Yalta, we have to take you back there. If you would have been from a Polish side of Ukraine, you could stay in the camp. Oh, if we would be from the Polish side, we could stay in the camp. So, of course, the next day, the next day they brought a big chart of Eastern Europe, of Polish side and Soviet side of Ukraine. He said, if you were from this side, you can stay in the camp. But if you are here, we are forced to give you back to Soviet Union. All right. So here we are. Everybody started finding cities and so on Polish side. All right. My mother said, well, my father and my mother were born in Polish side. In passport, I'm written that I'm a Polish person. So we all then were from Brest-Litovsk, Everybody in the camp was from the Polish side. And then all the people that were born lived in Soviet, under Soviet rule in Ukraine and so on, were writing that they are coming from there. So life started to be really great. We were getting rations. Our garden started to produce fruit and things like that. Life became normal. And from May to September, the kids that were organized were split up what grades they go. Some stayed in the grammar school. Some were in the gymnasium. So there were 8 grades of gymnasium. My sister was going to the highest gymnasium, and I was going to the lowest one. And we had a theater organized, we had school organized, we had even a magazine that was called Skitalis, meaning the person that is goes from one place to another, has no place that is his own. So life was really good. All right. So as I said, I was first year gymnasium. Then this is September of 45. Now, as time goes on, my sister, in about a year and a half or so, finishes the gymnasium, and she is accepted to University of Göttingen studying medicine. That's away from the camp, and she has to live there. She still gets a ration, but so. And my father producing tobacco, Now, all men were getting American cigarettes, a package a month. So my father didn't smoke his. He sold those things for, going money and so on. And that's how he paid my sister's life in Göttingen. All right, 2 years passes by, everything is just fine. And now we had teachers in the school. Some of them were university professors. Some of them were engineers. We had even a principal of our school was born on the Polish side, and he knew Latin, so Latin was a main thing. We kind of hated it, but it came handy later on in life. So after 2 years, immigration started. People in England needed in their mines, in their, hospitals, and there were doctors in our group. There were doctors, there were nurses. They were hired to go to England. And the camp began thinner and thinner as population. And also in the gymnasium, there were not many teachers. That is number 4 gymnasium I'm talking. It's already time. And I heard that in another camp in Hanover, there was a much larger camp, Ukrainian camp. And they still have a pretty large gymnasium. So I decided that I will go there. And when I came there, there were also other students from my camp there too. And there was one girl that I knew from way back from German camps yet. Let's see, we are already now, as far as years, most probably 1948 in time. So in Hanover, there was a very large camp, Camp Lysenko. And for women, single women that went to gymnasium, there was a room in the building 2A. And building 2A was very close to the entrance to the camp. On the first floor, there was camp, whoever was in charge of the camp offices. On the other floor, it was one of the priests, bishops living with his family. And on the top floor was a room for women's dorm. So I was assigned to that. So it was very close. The gymnasium was on the first floor, and I was living in the same building on top. I am in Hanover in the women's dorm, and I had to catch up with schooling there. I was in the fourth grade gymnasium, actually, when I came to the Twin Cities, there was one guy that was in that gymnasium, and he told me, I'm not scared of you anymore, because the boys used to do tricks and take our homeworks and copy as if it was there. It was just kid stuff. Anyhow, so I am in Hanover living in that woman's dorm. I had to provide my own cooking for existence there, to catch up with materials that they covered. Time went on fine. Now we are ready to, after a while, the camp was also, people went to Brazil, people went to Argentina, to New Zealand, so the gymnasium was closing. And I had to go and live with my parents in another camp called Braunschweig. And in the short time, we had a sponsor to come to the United States. So we went to the camp when we were called. We went to a camp and we had final interview, who we are. And during this interview, my father said, I'm sorry, this is my passport. I am not actually from the Western Ukraine. I am engineer and so on. This is my passport. I was born in Ukraine under Soviet Union. This is who I am, and this is my family. So they said, well, okay, we will talk to you later. We'll have to clear up where you were born. So we were put aside for a year and a half time. At that time, there was a Korean War, and so they looked not to have Russian spies. That was, later on we found out about that. We didn't know that. So in 2 years or a year and a half, we were called again, and we were taken to Bremerhaven. We were put on a boat to come to the United States. This was August of 51. All right, so we were on the ship Muir. It was warm August. We had to sleep on the lower decks on the hammocks. You know, this is the Army transport ship, Muir, the name. So in the evening we were swinging on the mat. But during the day we were up on the upper decks. It was nice. And in 10 days we were already in New York. We saw Statue of Liberty, and then we stayed overnight and looking at from the New York harbor, looking at the cars moving. One way it's a shiny white, and on the other side it was red that was going the other way. It was completely different feelings seeing New York, you know. So then again, we had to go through a screening, and each person got, depending on where we are going, we were grouped. We were given each $5 to get from New York to Chicago for meal, $5 each. So we went down off the ship. Father said, well, let's take some breakfast. Let's have little meal. So we ate little meal from that, but saved more $5 from $5. And we were put on a railroad and taken to Chicago. Now, each of us had a little suitcase, my mother, my father, and my father had a wooden trunk that he made, where he had all his books, our documents, and whatever. So we come to Chicago on Sunday, and we are waiting for somebody to pick us up. We were there in the morning, and it's getting afternoon, nobody's coming. And then all of a sudden, two guys come in that I knew from way camp. They said, well, we are here, and I know one was in my even grade, you know, and well, we're here to pick you up. So here we go. Not our sponsor, but the two of them. So they took us to one family, they fed us, and they told that the sponsor came to church on Sunday and said that Orleanics are coming, but I'm not going to bother with them. They can do whatever they want to. He was thinking that he could marry my sister. So that's why he was our sponsor. But then he was told that my sister is in Montana, not with us. She went on another visa. So he said, they can do whatever they want to now. So luckily, these two young men, they came and picked us up. They were here in the United States already a couple years. They had a car. They grew up, and they're no more the kids that they were in school. And so they took us to one family, and then that family fed us, and my father and my mother stayed with them, and they took me to another family that was from the same camp. That was actually, in the camp, he was in charge of the kitchen, of the produce and everything else. So we knew each other. Well, after that, my father found a job cleaning canisters, war canisters, and I found a job sorting or assembling Christmas cards. Now, this is August, okay, so it's preparation for Christmas. I was getting 76 cents an hour. In Chicago, that was a big money at that time. Now, the trolley or train was costing only 20 cents, you know, so it was great. So in a couple of days, we found an apartment. Now the highway goes through that apartment. That building is no longer there. We found an apartment that had one bedroom and one kitchen and place to sit. And my father worked at night, and I worked during the day. Things were going fine. This is August 1951. Now, when I was going to gymnasium, I had good geography classes. I thought of United States is really something to be there and to be ahead, to make something out of my life, you know. I had great hopes looking at the Statue of Liberty and the meaning of this too. I really got high hopes. Well, I worked there assembling Christmas cards maybe a month. And then I decided, well, maybe I should look around. So in the morning, I decided that I will go to Montgomery Ward and be a filing clerk. But at the same time, there was another woman going to go to she found out that Zenith was making at that time big Christmas, big TVs. And so she said, oh, they pay much better and so on. And she was taking a bus to go this way. So she asked me, Wanda, come with me and help me fill out the paperwork because my English is not that good. And I said, but I'm going this way. I said, oh, you can take the bus later on and go that way. So I did go with her. Now, I wasn't quite 17 at that time, and you could not get a job in a factory like that. So I went with her, and she said, fill out the papers. But I'm not old enough. Fill up. Tell them that you'll bring your papers tomorrow. And then by tomorrow, maybe they will forget about it. Okay, so I filled out the papers, and I was hired on the spot. So I was working at Zenith at $1.85 or something like that. And then I was working on Zenith at the line that's moving. Every minute you had to do 6 operations on a board. You know, there were no printed boards. You had to do it with a screwdriver or with soldering with a. So it was really fast moving. Then I was put on the line that every minute you had to do 6 operations. 6 soldering operations with a hot gun, or 6 screwing on parts, resistors, and all kinds of things. Okay, I was getting $1.58. $1.58 from 76 cents is a big thing. My father was working at night. He was getting less money than that. And then the contract ended, so we were out of a job. Here comes December, no job, no. So I thought, well, what am I going to do? And then I thought, well, I'm going to go to high school. It's walking distance, 4 or 5 blocks. So I went to the high school, and I took another friend of mine, just in case I needed more translations. So here we are. I went to Tule High, and I brought some papers, and I said, from my papers, I went to Ukrainian high school up to this. I went to German. I didn't tell you. I went to German women's too, and and the principal says to me, and you need a translator to go with you? You want to go to third high? I said, well, look at my papers. I finished math, and I finished this, and this. And so in the same room, there was, besides principal, there was an elderly woman standing and heard all the conversations that I had with the principal. Mrs. O'Malley was her name. Such a lovely woman. So Mrs. O'Malley says, I'll take her in my homeroom. Okay? So the conversation between the principal and Mrs. O'Malley, and she heard all the conversation, really helped me. So she said, I'll take her in my homeroom. So she took me in her homeroom, and so I was able to attend. And in 2 semesters in summer, I finished high school. My father wanted me to study pharmacy. So I went to University of Illinois Pharmacy, medical school, took this test, entrance test, I passed, and then I turned around and I went to University of Illinois, Chicago campus. That was Navy Pier, the one that goes into the lake that time. And I passed test there, and I was accepted there. And my father said, why did you do that? And I said, well, and meanwhile, I had job as a soda jerk or whatever it was called in the pharmacy stores. A long time ago, maybe you don't remember, or maybe you're too young to remember. There was, besides pharmacy portion, there would have a place that people could buy a soda or coffee or quick lunch. And so I took a job near pharmacy there in Chicago, and I looked at what's going on in the pharmacy store. And I thought I would spend 5 years studying. I decided I would study chemistry. Chemistry, you could always have a job, and it's more inventive, more that you could do something good in this world. After studying at the University of Illinois, it had only 2 years. The campus only provided for 2 years. And the rest of it, I had to go to Champaign-Urbana. And my father said, no, you're not going there. You will go to some university in Chicago. Well, by that time, I met the guy that I married, and he knew, my father realized that, and he said, well, he's going there, you're not going to go there. My father, by that time in Chicago, had a very good job in his profession and so on. So he said, I'll pay, and I found another school that I wanted to go. It is IIT, Illinois Institute of Technology. That was a very excellent school. I studied chemistry. After 2 years or so, I married the guy that I met at the University of Illinois. He was going to Champaign, finishing his school, and I was finishing my school at IIT. I finished IIT, and my husband at that time, he was going to University of Illinois Champaign. He got already master's degree, and after he got master's degree, he looked for a job. By that time, already I was pregnant with a third child. He got a job at Macalester College, teaching at Macalester College. So we came to Twin Cities. And after that, well, living in Twin Cities was very good. It's a beautiful city, St. Paul. I got a apartment very close to Macalester College, so he could actually almost walk to there. And then later on, I found a house that very close to Macalester College, even closer. And at that time, there were 3 kids. I had a car that was paid, and Victor and a husband that had a full-time job. So I wanted to have a house. We went to bank to get a loan for that. And Victor, Victor could not figure out that we could have a house. He just couldn't. But I had the finances in the house. I thought that we could. So we went to a bank, and at that time, they didn't ask what woman is she working or not. When they heard that he has a job at Macalester, you have a loan. So we had a loan. We paid down like maybe $200. We had a house. No more straw mattresses. That's all gone. Life was sweet and good in the United States. So it was just wonderful. Just and anything that I dreamed of was coming true, you know.